Hello, everyone. Um, so we're going to start with a few introductions, just so everybody knows who we are. So I'm going to start out. So I will introduce first Isaiah Hawkins. So Isaiah, you want to tell people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Isaiah Hawkins. I am a fifth year senior in my last semester of a music education degree at Michigan State University. I was student teaching until the world shut down. While I was here, I was a music director of State of Fits a cappella that competed in ICCA, recorded some albums and tours around the Midwest. I also co-founded the MSU Spartones, which was a collegiate group that put together the collegiate groups, all the collegiate groups, and competed in the Open and did some things around there. Outside of that, I was on the boss team this year. I am the North Region relationship manager for CASA. So if you're in the Midwest and Northeast, I am your liaison to CASA in both getting to festivals and in future programs that are soon to be announced, but just your point person. And yeah,
Excellent.
that's it.
Oh, my watch just talked to me. Kyle, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, thank you, Bryan. I'm Kyle Hogan. I was in the collegiate scene originally. That's where I started my a cappella experience. I was in the Yellow Jackets, an all-male group at the University of Rochester. You might be familiar with them from the Sing-Off. I was not on the Sing-Off. I joined immediately after, but kind of dealt with those questions most of my time in the group till I was a senior. They're like, "You're on the Sing-Off?" I'm like, "No, we age and we graduate." But I've been involved in various projects since. I live in the DC area right now. I currently work at the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice, which is very different from my a cappella life and very interesting right now. And I am in the vocal band Nomadic. I sing bass for the group. It is myself, a male beatboxer, and four ladies. And we had the amazing experience of getting to go to the ACA Open Finals last year. And, we're around doing recording and stuff. That's what's up.
Excellent. I am Bryan Guffey. I started my a cappella experience in high school, where I founded my first group, possibly presaging this class because it was called 50-50, because there were 2 white people and 2 non-white people in the group. I did not do a cappella in college, actually. I went to a school with no a cappella groups, but was heavily involved in musical theater. I have my bachelor's of fine arts in musical theater. Afterwards, I moved to New York and did theater for a bit, decided I wanted a regular paycheck, and started working in technology, and then had the very lucky opportunity to go work with a group called Full Sail on Crystal Cruise Lines. And it was there that I really learned how to be an a cappella bass, because I got very lucky and the person that I was replacing was Tim Faust, currently of Home Free. So that experience really changed the way I thought about a cappella. When I came back, I was very passionate about a cappella, went to SoJam for my first time, went to Sing Strong for my first time, really went to my first a cappella festivals. I worked on the marketing team for a cappella Records when it was first starting up. I've served with CASA in the past and have taught at festivals like SoJam, We Sing. I serve on the Sing Strong board and was the diversity and inclusion coordinator for the Women's A Cappella Association. So, and in my day job today, I do a lot of IT work for healthcare organizations. I sort of manage the tools that we use to deliver services to our clients. So that's me. Again, you're in a class about diversity, equity, and inclusion in a cappella. Just a little bit about the purpose of this class. The goal of this class is for us to be able to give you, to sort of share our perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion, to hear the questions that you have, so that we can all discuss opportunities, issues, concerns, challenges, successes, etc. around diversity, equity, and inclusion in acapella, both on and off stage. We've prepared a couple of prompt questions to get things going, but this is really important to us that this be interactive, and so we're hoping you all have a bunch of questions for us. This is about helping you and sharing our thoughts and experiences, so we want this experience to be one that you all really help shape. Before we hop into the conversation, we have some definitions that we want to go over with you all to sort of define the terms as we're going to use them today. So I will flip it over to Kyle and Isaiah to go over the definitions we have.
Okay, so the first word in what Bryan was talking about, diversity. I think we all generally have an idea of it, but just to get us all on the same page, diversity includes all the ways in which people differ, encompassing the different characteristics that make one individual or group different from another. And while diversity is often used in reference to race, ethnicity, and gender, we embrace a broader definition of diversity that also includes age, national origin, religion, disability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, education, marital status, language, and physical appearance. Our definition also includes diversity of thought, so ideas, perspectives, and values, and we also recognize that individuals affiliate with multiple identities. And then onto the second word, equity. We consider equity the fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all people, while at the same time striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups. And improving equity involves increasing justice and fairness within the procedures and processes of institutions or systems, as well as in their distribution of resources. So tackling equity issues requires an understanding of the root causes of outcome disparities within our society. Isaiah?
All right, the next one that we're going to include is inclusion, which is the act of creating environments in which any individual or group can be and feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. An inclusive and welcoming climate embraces differences and offers respect in words and actions for all people. It's important to note that while an inclusive group is by definition diverse, a diverse group isn't always inclusive. And increasingly, recognition of unconscious or implicit bias helps organizations to be deliberate about addressing issues of inclusivity. And the next one is privilege, which is the unearned benefits given to members of one social group as a result of the systematic targeting or marginalization of another social group.
And then our last term that we will probably use is oppression. So oppression is the systematic targeting or marginalization of one social group by another social group for the benefit of the more powerful social group. If anybody has any, we'll take a quick second here to see if anybody has any questions about those definitions. Or are there other terms that you think are helpful that we can include as we talk about things today? And you can feel free to just unmute yourself and say something. If not, we will continue.
And the definitions be placed in the chat.
I certainly can do that. Glad to do so.
Can you all also share your pronouns so that we can address you as you want to be addressed?
Yeah, absolutely. My pronouns are they, them.
My pronouns are he, him, and they, them.
My pronouns are he, him.
Excellent. Okay, so the definitions are really long, and so they don't want me to just post the definitions by themselves. So give me 2 seconds, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to post a link to a Google Doc that has the definitions.
While that happens, Isaiah and Kyle can continue onward.
Absolutely.
Sure. So the next step is us just giving a bit of background on where we are and how we approach this discussion as the moderators for today. So for me, I come into the a cappella space as one of the few, as you can see, one of the few Black males that were in an a cappella group at Michigan State University, which is a predominantly white institution. so that is something that I continually address both within my own group in State of Fifths and within the larger a cappella community at Michigan State University, in kind of having those discussions on why that may have been and what we could do as an a cappella community to become more inclusive and really expanding outreach into different communities. And there are a lot of things that we realized in having those discussions. For example, if you go on tour to schools, to high schools and middle schools around your area, maybe that your members came from or that teachers have reached out to you, and you use that as a sort of recruiting, and you go to high schools that are 80%, 90% white, and you look at who's coming to your university from those schools, then that already reinforces a certain hierarchy there. Similarly, if you're advertising at places on your university, sending postings or posting in specific Facebook or Twitter or Instagram groups, and you look at who is in those groups, and that reinforces a certain racial hierarchy, and so on and so forth. There are a lot of these things that we just realized. So that's a lot of the perspective that I come into it from. But also, while I was at Michigan State University, I was heavily politically involved, and I took on a number of leadership roles in our student government. So I had a large role in addressing issues of social inequity on a larger scale within the university, and having those conversations with people from my colleagues and my peers, to university administrators, to the president, or if you followed Michigan State University in the past years, presidents that we've had, and having those discussions and really realizing that we can use our music and our platform as musicians as a way to address social inequity. So performing music with the intention that the message that we communicate through that that the message that we communicate through our music be intentional, because what songs we do sends a message about who we are and what our values are, but also what songs we don't perform and what messages we don't communicate also sends a message about who we are as musicians and what we value as people. So I see it as a huge strength that we as musicians have to communicate messages about social equity and social justice in our music. The most powerful sets in a cappella and in the most powerful music that I've seen released, at least to me, that has affected me and has really been impactful, has been that has done some kind of social commentary and that has made some intentional effort to address issues of social inequity. For example, my favorite album of all time is To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar. One of my favorite a cappella sets, my favorite a cappella set to come out is the Vassar Devil's Boss 2016 set that talked about war. And things like that just stick out to me. Like the Vocal Rush, All Good People cover. Like with State of Fifths, we did a song about school shootings that released. Well, we did a song and we released it like the week after, or we recorded it the week after the Las Vegas school shooting. So we addressed that in our music. And then our next ICCA set that year was talking about faith and religion and different conflicts that arise there. And so that is something that has stayed in my mind as a music director, as an arranger, and as a consumer of music in general, and the power that we have as musicians. So yes, sorry, that went on a lot of tangents, but yes.
No, that's good. So for me, the way I start, the way I really entered the a cappella space when I was thinking about what I could contribute comes from a performance quality perspective. So I've, again, a background in musical theater, and initially I wanted to be involved sort of more in a cappella because I was bored by performances on stage. People sang really pretty, but they didn't make me feel anything. What I've grown to really consider is that if you want to move your audience, you have to be at the end of anything else, authentic in the story or message that you're communicating. Being authentic is hard if you don't have a frame of reference for what the story that you're telling, right? So when we choose to do music, when we tell stories that we don't have personal experience with, or when we haven't taken the time to learn or understand the perspective of people who do have that experience, we fail to be authentic in our communication of those stories. And so, it's appropriation sort of in its purest sense. It's like, I like this story, I want to use it, but I don't really understand where it's coming from. We feel things when people are authentic. And so then sometimes we think, well, I can take that thing and be authentic with it without considering what they went through to be able to be authentic about that story and, share that feeling with us. So when I work with groups, when I talk with groups about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what I often say is, if you want to do stories that you don't have personal experiences with, that means you need to make your group look more like the stories you want to tell. And so the opportunity of diversity, equity, and inclusion, bringing more people of different backgrounds together, making sure everybody has the opportunity to be heard and to have a seat at the table and also participate at the table, is a broader range of stories and opportunities for us to use in our music to inspire and connect with people, which is going to increase our performance opportunities. That is what you're doing on stage, right? It's also what you do off stage. I firmly believe that no group, and this probably picks up a bit from what happened in the last class when we talk about group management, a group is only as good as its relationships off stage. If you have conflicts, if you have issues that you're not resolving in your group off stage, when you're on stage attempting to be at your most vulnerable, those will bleed through. And so we have to practice what we preach on stage, off stage, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. So and that's really about taking those voices and centering the ones that often don't get the opportunity to be heard. Whether that is stories of people who don't often get to be heard, whether that is people in our group that don't traditionally have the look or the voice or X, Y, and Z that are centered in our performances, and figuring out what it means to broaden our expectation of what good and quality a cappella is. So that's a bit of where I come from when I think about all of this. I think we're here, we're making music. We could make music in a million ways, but we chose to come together and sing with people. So I think it's a very human thing to do, and we have a responsibility to do something with that.
I really appreciate what both Bryan and Isaiah have said so far. I think a lot of this, a lot of the issues we juggle and kind of grapple with when thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're kind of hard to tackle, and I really appreciate how clear and pointed y'all were in discussing. So the angle I kind of come from when or that I'm bringing to the discussion, or I hope to bring to the discussion of diversity, equity, inclusion, is kind of one of striving towards better allyship. I am white, straight, male, cis, and but I also come from relatively socioeconomically marginalized background, and I've never really strongly identified with kind of popular modes of masculinity for straight men. So it's not only that I'm coming to a conversation like this and thinking like, okay, I'm merely here to listen and I don't gain anything from this. I think people all need to understand, even when coming from a position of very much privilege, the value that there is in this. The arc of my experience has been one of a lot of growth, and I try to help as I continue to grow and treat myself critically, bring others along that path too. I didn't say this in my background before, But in school, I didn't study music. I studied philosophy and economics. So I really approach all this with a very philosophical perspective. It's just my nature. But the group I was in undergrad, from 2011 to 2015, all men, for better or for worse, we went through a lot growing together to try to be better men. And that there were also things I look back, I'm like, whoa, there were failings. And to recognize those and talk with each other and hold each other accountable is very important. And now the group I'm in, Nomadic, 2 men, 4 women, were across a spectrum of races, ethnicities, and sexualities. I'm white, Julie's white, Isaiah and Lanique are Black, and Archie is Indian, and very a range of sexualities across us. And I've really found a lot of benefit for my own personal growth in learning to listen better, and the benefit. And sorry, I'm kind of stumbling over words, but also seeing how much our group as performers benefit from the individual things each of us bring to it. Very much seeing the challenges and benefits that Bryan was speaking to when he spoke about authenticity and having that both off stage and on. So as I said at the start, I guess I think the relevant position of allyship as not just a bystander, but kind of an active, continually striving role is one I hope to speak to.
So at this point, we have some prompt questions that we can talk about, but we do want to, I think we really want to ask you all if you have any questions for us that we can talk about before we use the stock questions that we came up with. And if you do, again, you can just unmute and ask us.
Hello, I'm Lee. I go he, him pronouns. So I'm finishing this first school year at a school that is 80% Black. And like I had an a cappella group in my previous school, and like the number one question I've had is like, oh, when are you gonna get an a cappella group and they're gonna compete? And part of what I'm struggling with is the school is incredible. It's a very high achieving school. And it's the best diverse high achieving school in the state, but everybody is really comfortable with who they are. They're comfortable with their race. They don't have to deal with being tokens and anything in their everyday society and in their school. I worry bringing them into the broader a cappella world that they're gonna be, whether they're successful or not, they're just gonna be looked at as this box to check and as tokens. And so I'm trying to figure out the best way to get them into a cappella and get them into the community, but also not have them feel like they have to represent for every single Black group or every single Black person who's becoming a singer at that point.
Absolutely. Isaiah, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. First up, hi, Lee. I feel that very personally. I think that the best thing, at least from where I would approach it, the best thing to do is for them to make music first. Sorry, my computer died, so I'm switching over my phone. For them to just make music and like regardless, being unapologetically Black and being unapologetically high achieving and high performing musicians, whether that be outside of the community, in quotes, in italics, in the predominantly white state that we see a cappella groups, especially high school and the younger groups being almost entirely, with a few notable exceptions, majority white. I think them singing and making and performing their truth and performing the music that represents the message they want to put out into the world, I think that first and foremost is how I would see it, and then letting the community approach it as it will, because I believe that there is a strength to them performing not just as the token, or not as the token Black group of high school a cappella singers, but as an excellent singing group. And Lee, knowing you, I know they will be excellent. So I think just the putting the music that they are able to make at the forefront and letting that speak for their identity and their ability.
Yeah, I think that what Isaiah said is really important. I know that this is a shift for you, Lee, and coming into this school from the previous experiences that you've had. And I think sometimes those of us who have, like, when we come across, especially like younger students who have had a very different experience than ours, we worry about, taking away some of the safety that they've had the opportunity to exist in, right? But I mean, we know this. Their parents have fully informed them that safety is a function of where they are in school today, right? And so I think they are probably way more prepared than you think they are to experience that. It is a different type of opportunity to have them tell their stories. What is exciting about that opportunity is that it is a perspective on a story that is not often told, right? But you're right. People are going to look at them as a token Black group, and then they're going to be surprised, and then they're going to say things like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea they would do this that well," or things like that, right? Or people will have all of the opinions and the stereotypes that they have. I think that your students will have to experience that sometime. And you as a director can help them process that. And this is something I know from experience you're very good at doing with your students. I think that's the opportunity of especially being a teacher with choral groups and music groups, is you have the opportunity to engage with them on conversations about social contexts that you can sort of explore through the music, and what people say about that music that we don't get in other opportunities. So I think, like Isaiah said, let them, bring them in, let them be them, and do your best to protect their opportunity to be them. Always remind them that they don't have to change for anybody else. That as we've always talked about, winning is not the thing, right? Being who you are is the thing, and I think that will serve them and you quite well. Kyle, anything you want to add?
Not a ton to add, but I think what I've seen in my experience is that really just letting people take in whichever way you're presenting yourself, it's just so much less of a struggle, I guess. Internally, I feel like in the long run, and more effective to let just people do what they do with what you put out, and don't worry too much about changing yourself for others. There were a lot of times I feel like when groups I've been in have tried to choose songs for a rep and really agonized over it, and then found that the things that really we connected with the most initially were the things that we succeeded with the most. So.
I think, Kevin, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I was looking for the raise your hand button, but I just couldn't find it, so I'll just talk now. Okay, so I'm part of an a cappella group at Ithaca College called Ithaca Pella. We are like an all-male identifying group, and our set last year was about queer identity, and we had like 4 songs going through the journey of queer culture, and then our closing song was a right song that told the story of someone struggling with acceptance with the family. And it like really touched a lot of people, including us in the group. Yet now, this was last year. So this year, I think one of my biggest struggles was finding the identity of this year's group, and then for next year's group as well. I'm graduating, but I'm wondering, do you have any recommendations of how to find the identity of an ever-changing kind of culture, kind of like what acapella is?
Yeah, so actually, I mean, I'm gonna let Isaiah or Kyle start here. Both of them were in college groups. I have an outsider's perspective of this. So Kyle, you want to start since Isaiah started last time?
Sure. I think, and coming from, I don't think we didn't refer to ourselves that way, but I think they do now, and I appreciate the progress of all male identifying. But coming from an all male identifying group, when I was in college, it was something that shifted a lot from year to year in terms of like the way that different classes of guys express their masculinity. That was a big change. At one point, I think we had no queer members in our group, and at one point we had 5 out of like 12. And even then, beyond that, just like in the way our personalities interacted, the group was a lot broier than before I got in it. And then the class that I joined with, we were all like very kind of sensitive, relatively quiet. I mean, I'm extroverted, but I'm a little softer spoken. That changed over time. So for us, it was, we try to approach it from the direction of like, we spent a lot of time outside of the group together, and we encourage that, and we want to make people feel welcome and comfortable. We don't require or expect anything out of people. Like if somebody doesn't want to come to a party, they don't have to. If somebody doesn't want to grab a meal, but we always invite. So really, I think it just kind of learning, and I feel like encouraging a culture of openness is really important. And I like you kind of hinted at, I think trying to set that ground before you graduate, I think is really important. Trying to like have a sit down with next year's leaders or things so that you know that the culture is going to persist. There's no easy answer, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, Kevin, I 100% agree with Kyle on that one. I was in your shoes this time last year. I told State of Fits at the beginning of my last year with them back in like August, that the entire year would be about, we would center that around identity and like finding what our group was and like what State of Fits was that year, what it meant to us. And what that turned into is, exactly as Kyle said, a lot of time outside of rehearsal spent with each other, be it at parties or be it hanging out before and after rehearsal, getting late night or getting food at the Union at 11 o'clock at night, and just getting to know each other and just sharing our triumphs, our struggles, and all the feelings, and just being a closer family. Because what I found in that aspect was the identity of the group was the identity of the individuals that made it up. So for context, to end our ICCA set of that year, our identity year, we wrote our first original, and we based that around what we as members of the group had been feeling throughout the year, what we were going through in our life, and just telling our story. And that wouldn't have been possible if we didn't know each other. And we all recognize that what State of Fits as a group is like this year in 2020 is different than it was last year, is different than what it was when I joined back in 2015. So identity is an ever-changing thing, and just knowing who you're singing with and being open to their experiences, including and especially when they differ from yours, and really making a holistic group environment from that. And then I think the general group identity will come quite naturally through that.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add to that is, I think when I look at it, depends. Let me start with this. It depends on what your group wants to be, and how your group, like who you want to be overall. There are groups that have a very consistent identity from year to year. That's because the identity is part of the structure of the group, right? So the group chooses, at some point the group chose, this is who we're going to be, and they've done a bunch of work to sort of institutionalize that. There are benefits from that. The group will often have a more consistent sound. The group will do music that looks a bit more sort of consistent from year to year. People can go and say, oh, that is this group when they hear them, right? I think you don't spend time as much figuring out what your group identity is every year, because the group identity is something that people choose to buy into when they join the group. Downsides of that, of course, is that you can quickly become very homogenous, right? Everybody is the same. Everybody is doing the same thing. And also, while that may work for a bit, trends change. What people are into changes. And if your group doesn't change with that, then your group becomes stagnant. And so I think a couple of things are important to think about when you think about developing a group's identity. One, everybody in college is figuring out their identity at the same time. So be comfortable recognizing that your identity will always be a little bit loose, because you're all figuring things out day to day to day. I can remember so many times in my college experience and after where I thought I was one person for like years and years and years, and then one day I woke up and was a different one, you know, and that happens. Also, again, I think both, as Kyle and Isaiah said, the identity of your group is in some way an amalgam of the rest of the identities of the people in the group, right? And so what you're doing is necessarily a compromise of who people are. I think what you are looking for in that compromise are the things that bring people together, and also the things that are most often not expressed, right? So the opportunity to be a group that's very queer identified is an opportunity both for the members in the group, because it's not a thing that's often centered, and an opportunity for the group as a whole, because it's not something that's often portrayed when you're performing, right? So there's advantages both for the people in the group in feeling affirmed and outside the group. So I think that's where you're looking for identities where they intersect in that way. It's the opportunity to really do the work in a way that is affirming to your group members, as well as beneficial to your group, because you want to be good. Like, what group doesn't want to be good in some way? You know, whether that is having fun and feeling good or performing amazing sets on stage. And sometimes you don't have to choose. Most of the time, I think you don't have to choose, actually.
I just had a thought relevant to this. Something that I encountered, and I imagine a lot of older acapella groups especially encounter, is there's a big element of tradition in older groups. The Yellow Jackets were founded in like 1956. And one of the things that we grappled with, and I think we just naturally had to deal with on an ad hoc basis over time, was when we had traditions that we kind of realized we outgrew, that we found maybe inappropriate over time. There's almost sometimes the group had moments in its history where it was more of a social group, almost more of a fraternity than simply a singing group, for better and for worse. So sometimes there were moments where we felt constrained by previous traditions, and I don't really have a clear solution for that either. But I wanted to recognize that I think that's something a lot of people are challenged by, not just our intuition in the moment about how we feel about our identity, but kind of the pressure from the past, the institutionalized pressure from the past.
Definitely. We had another question in here from a couple of people that have echoed it about how to foster an inclusive choral atmosphere. And sort of specifically, like, if you have an open environment that isn't diverse, how do you aspire for diversity? For example, if you're all white guys, So one of the things that I am mildly famous for is a post one time in the CASA Facebook group about a group from Harvard that that posted a video that really looked like they had just done the very minimal best to like get the exact quota of like one person of every like alternative ethnicity into their group, and then the rest of the group was white people. And there are a lot of conversations that came out of that, but one of the things that came out of that were people like, well, we can't choose who comes to audition for our group. And to a degree, that's true. But here's the catch-22 you're in. You're in a group full of white guys, right? You want your group to look more diverse, whether that is you want more people of color, maybe you're looking to include people from different genders and gender identities, right? Whatever it is you're looking for more of. But those people are not going to come join your group on their own or audition for it because they don't see themselves represented in the group when they look at it. So the answer is you have to go ask them, right? It's very simple. It can feel very uncomfortable because you feel like you are tokenizing somebody. You're like, oh, hey, we're looking for a Black person in our group. Can you come be the Black person in our group? So don't just do one, right? Like you want to be really intentional about your outreach. If you're looking for more people of color, go to the places where people of color are and say, hey, we don't have any people of color in our group. We recognize that's a real problem. We want to not just put one person of color in our group, but we want a lot of you. Don't say a lot of you. We want to put a lot of people of color in our group. Like we want our group to be more diverse intentionally. And then you have to convince them you're not just asking them to be tokens. And you do that by continuing to do that work until people join. And then like keep doing it. Don't stop because you're like, we got 2. Great. Awesome. Moving on. But just continue to do it. And not only bring them in, make sure that they have the opportunity to have their voices heard. When you're having meetings, make sure that you're electing them into leadership positions, even if you're not sure, right? Because sometimes people don't get the opportunity to showcase their leadership skills because they're in an environment that they're already uncomfortable in because they took a risk to be the first person or the first 1 or 2 people to be in that space. So you have to take the opportunity to give those people that chance. There are hands coming up. This is exciting. I don't know. But first of all, do Isaiah or Kyle want to add anything to that question?
I think you hit it spot on the head with reaching out to those communities where the people go to, where the people are. Like perform your music with a broader community and reach out to that community with an intentional tilt towards we want to have a more diverse group, both in maybe in terms of diverse membership, maybe in terms of diverse audience, doing collaborations with different people of different identities, like these kinds of things. If you make that an intentional and authentic part of your existence as a group, that inclusive atmosphere will come. And I think I saw Daniel's hand first, and then Emily, and then more people.
I'm making a list.
Okay.
Dan Pfister.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
Hey, all. Thank you all so much for putting this together. Very excited. Can you talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion at an institutional level in acapella? I'm thinking particularly because we're at BOSS with like a CASA space maybe, but also in other institutions such as varsity vocals with ICCA and ICHSA, RARB, etc. Yeah.
Yes, we can. So, I mean, Isaiah, or I talked first the last time. So Isaiah or Kyle, if you have things you want to say, start, and then I'll come in later. Otherwise, okay, go for it.
I can start. So I've also judged at competitions with ACA. They're the ones who put on festivals like NAC, and I've judged with varsity vocals at the quarterfinal, semifinal level for high school and college. And I think it's something that is happening, and something that the people who work with those organizations are doing. But I think that the valuable thing to keep pushing is we want to see we need to really foster diversity, equity, and inclusion for competitors and students. We need to foster that within the organizations that hold these festivals and the people that are judging. You know, if it's just like kind of the conversations you hear around like the Grammys, for example, we need that. And I think that progress is happening, though. I think the more active, the better. Isaiah, do you have any thoughts?
I 100% agree. It's the people within the organizations that is, as I mentioned in answering the last question, that is an intentional and active focus of what they're doing in reaching out to the broader communities. And I think it is, as one can probably expect, it's a symptom of the larger inequities and issues of representation in a cappella as a whole. And as a cappella as a style becomes more diverse to a number of ideas, races, and everything we include in our definition, I think that will and is filtering up from people graduating from high school and college groups and wanting to be more involved. For example, me as an example, I left my group this past year. During that time, I interned with Varsity Vocals, had a great time. This year, I've accepted a position with CASA. I just accepted a position with NAC. I just joined a post-collegiate group, and I'm throwing my hand out there, getting involved in as many ways as I possibly can. And I know many, many people of many, many different backgrounds, just like me, that I've met through all of my experiences that love a cappella. So I think that we'll see that these trends. It's happening slowly, but we'll see these things starting to change over time, even in broader scales.
So, yes, agreed. Couple of things. When we talk about institutional, DEI in certain of our a cappella institutions, there's what happens organically and what you can do to help make it happen. And I think one of the things that you can do to help make it happen is use the privilege that you have as a person of dominant identities to advocate for that. Whether that is bringing people that you know would be good to be a part of those institutions. For example, whether as a judge, or a producer, or on the CASA board, or all of these opportunities in the event staff for the different events, and introducing them to the people that you know, because you've had the opportunity to make those connections, and being persistent, right? Don't be afraid to piss some people off, because they're going to allow you to piss them off more than they will sometimes unintentionally. There's a lot of this implicit bias that we all have to deal with in ourselves. So sometimes if you are the one that's doing the pushing, you will get further, because people are simply automatically tuned to allow you to do the pushing further. And for people, I will also say, for people who are interested, people from marginalized backgrounds who want to be in those spaces, don't be afraid to push. That is what I have done my entire time. And I have pissed off a lot of people, but most of them have eventually come around to my way of thinking. And also the flip side of that is a lot of people were like, hey, you have energy. We need people. The reality is that most of our a cappella events and stuff, all is run by volunteers. And what everybody is desperate for is more volunteers. And so, that experience is often being willing to hop right in. I remember when I first really started getting involved with CASA, it was because I showed up at a SoJam, and I had a big car, because I got a big rental car accidentally. They just gave me a big one, and they needed people to do things. So I drove all of the groups around all weekend. And that by itself, just gave me the opportunity to connect with a lot of people. So take advantages of that. The messages that I would send to the institutions is say, continue to reach out to people who you see, reach out to people who you see doing the work regularly, day to day, and invite them in. Ask them, is this something they want to be a part of? And make sure that you are cultivating people who can vouch for you, because, like, Black people will not just walk into an all-white group if they don't know that it's going to be cool for them, right? So you have to have some sort of link oftentimes. Most of what I do in a lot of times is people just asking me, like, so I heard about this, is this cool, right? Is this a space where I'm going to be safe, or I'm going to be okay, And so make sure that you're cultivating those relationships so you have people who can say, yes, they are trying. This is a place where you will be listened to. Next up, I've got Emily, and then I have a question from the chat. And then after that, we've got Ashley as well.
I'll try to keep it quick. I'm Emily, she, her pronouns. Hi, everybody. So I have a big job at one of those institutions, and I have spoken, I think, to at least two of you about some of the challenges that can come in perception. But the thing I wanted to specifically ask about, I know that the Southern Poverty Law Center is a really great resource for dealing with everyday bigotry. They have a whole column on this, and sort of how to address issues with people that you work with, or your family, or your friends, etc. I do my very best to use gender neutral language and to create an inclusive space for my competitors and also for the judges. But I wanted to see if any of you would be willing to openly talk a little bit about how individuals who want to spend their privilege can speak up for those who might not be capable of, without sort of seeing themselves as like the savior role. That's not, I think creating inclusive spaces means that we speak up for those who might not be comfortable doing so, and how that works in a professional and a group setting. Thanks.
I think I can speak to that. I think I relate to, like, hearing you vocalize the question. I relate big time. There was initially some discomfort for me being invited to be part of this. I applied, to do a certain class, and I'm like, well, I'm a white guy and I'm straight and everything. But there are moments when I felt like it's important for us to be here and to have to when the opportunity comes up to seize that. There's definitely been moments I've seen in Nomadic, for example, when we're traveling for something, and there's a situation where like one of the women is uncomfortable or something is like racially tense. There's moments where I'm able to step forward and handle the situation because it's safer for me to. That's just kind of how it's been a very ad hoc thing for me, and like listening, stepping back, like kind of trying to recognize and learn when it's appropriate for me to step back and when others need me to step forward. It's very ad hoc for me.
I would just add, everybody should find opportunities to do bystander intervention training. So this is training that is specifically built to teach you how to step up in moments of things where people need support and use your privilege to provide that. We are taught sort of consistently to not rock the boat, to ignore things if they don't touch us directly. And it takes a really conscious choice to step out of that comfort and make yourself uncomfortable and put yourself at risk to do those things. I guess the first thing I would always say is get comfortable with being wrong, right? Like, just get comfortable with you're going to step too far, you're gonna get checked, you're gonna be reminded that you did something wrong. Get okay with that. That's the only way. I long ago realized that I am very bad at listening to anybody else sometimes, and it is required for me to put my foot right into the middle of the bad thing for me to realize to not do it again. And so anybody who's been my friend on Facebook for a long time knows that I like to make a lot of declarative statements. Half the time that's because I'm interested in being told that I'm wrong, because that's an opportunity for me to learn. We all get really worried about that experience of being told that we're wrong. And this comes from something that I think we should address, which is this idea of cancel culture, which is there is this perpetuated idea that if you step wrong, you're going to be canceled and your life will be over. The reality is that if you have any sort of privilege, it's very unlikely that anything that happens to you is going to be permanent, especially in digital spaces. So you can, like, it won't be fun. It won't necessarily feel good, but like many times you will get checked and it's appropriate and it won't feel fun. But if you can learn to embrace the opportunity to learn and let go of the ego, and this is the thing that's hard for all of us, right? I'm not gonna pretend I'm always good at this. I'm actually often very bad at it. But that ability to critically think about what is happening in a moment when somebody pushes back on us in a way that doesn't feel great to us, and think about the content of what they're saying, not the way in which they're delivering it, I think is the opportunity. So, I mean, don't be worried about being a savior, because people will tell you if you're being a savior very quickly. And they will tell you that, and what they will judge you on is whether you make a change, right? And if you make that change and you step in, then like into the discomfort, the people will recognize that you're willing to learn. I will say, for me, as a person who has the wonderful privilege to exist in a whole bunch of multiple marginalized backgrounds at the same time, the communities that I'm a part of, we have almost never been like, well, you stepped wrong once, we will never trust you again. Look, allyship is a process. And so that's a big, big deal. Really quick, just to let people know, there is another class starting. If you're planning to head to that class, just wanted to step up there. We can keep it going here. There is also a question about where this recording could be accessed later. Ace, do you want to answer that?
Sure. We will figure that out. It is currently being recorded to the cloud, so once we as an organization have an answer, we will tell everyone whose email we have.
Excellent. Isaiah, was there anything you wanted to add to this answer?
And on that note, adios.
All right, bye, Green. All right, Ace.
Bye.
Yeah, you were spot on with what I was saying. I 100% agree with the idea of using your privilege and just doing so in an open manner and not being afraid to be wrong.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
Outside of the southern part, what I was sort of trying to get at is if any of you, everyone can do a Google, I know this, but if you have specific resources for those who might be interested in best practices for addressing regular things like that, just because like I think that can be very helpful to have tools that are going in the right direction, because I did a Google and I'm going to find one of those diversity like speaking up trainings. I'm really excited about that, but I think it would be, if you have any resources, I would love to have those in the show notes.
Show notes. It's a podcast. I don't have any off the top of my head, but I mean, we can probably, everybody's gonna get a link to the Facebook group, so then we can put them in the Facebook group.
Yeah, I can't think of any right now either, but I would highly, highly recommend the bystander intervention trainings. That MSU required those for us to do every year online, but the in-person ones as well are very, very, very effective and very, very important.
I hope more people come back. Oh, this is so sad.
I feel like we could go for a lot longer.
Oh yeah.
My God, yes, absolutely.
Well, and we don't have to stop now. We'll keep going with the people we have and hope more people join. I'm just sending them links now.
I guess if no one else has a question, I'll chime in. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan. I'm he, him. I am writing a dissertation on scholastic a cappella and the construction of whiteness, community, and power. Several people that are connected to this chat and otherwise have already spoken with me. And one of the things that I'm especially interested in is how like leadership spaces like judging or the leadership of a group or the leadership space at an institution, what those kinds of conversation spaces look like and how what people do when in the process of trying to incorporate diversity, equity, inclusion. So for example, what happens when you are for example, at an ICCA, if you are the one person of color out of 3, 4, or 5 judges, like what is that experience like? What are things that we can do to try to work on that, etc. And just sort of, but not, that's just one example. Like there are many other examples that I'm sure you all have them.
I actually think with this topic, Emily would be the perfect person to ask because this is like she is very much experienced with. But I can tell you from my perspective, being a very often the only or one of few people of color in the competition setting, it's at an institutional level. I feel like there definitely is the intentional act to try to change that by again making directed outreach at people of different backgrounds to diversify that background. To like using another example within acapella, we're getting to the stage now where I can go to ICCA events and almost all of the judges are people that have backgrounds in acapella, which was not the case when I first started going to events 5 years ago and was getting commented on by show choir directors. And it's like these things, like, so I can definitely see the change being made in that realm, as well as these judging panels, as your example, becoming more diverse and having more different backgrounds of experience.
I mean, as the other person of color on this panel, I think, so I've been in a lot of those rooms where I am the only of a lot of things, right? And I mean, luckily for me, like, well, let me say this, I'm used to it now nearing 40, which is wild to say. But I think I'll give you an example of what the best producers do. And I take this example directly from watching Emily do it over and over again. The best producers make sure that everybody in that judging room, in that judging panel, understands what the expectations are. Right? They understand, they make sure that people understand how to address certain things and how not to address certain things. When there are, if something inappropriate comes up, they step in, right? They don't wait for you to step in. I think the worst feeling ever as a person of a marginalized group faced with somebody committing a microaggression is to realize that you are the only person who is going to speak up. And if you don't, nobody is. So I think one of the best things that the best producers do is if they see something like that, they take care of it. They shut it down and you don't have to be the one to do it. And so I think that's some of the stuff. I think additional training for judges on like diversity, equity, inclusion would be good. You know, an online training of some point that you can put them through. Something, you know, even with competitors, like being, you know, something that they're required, you know, they're college students or high school students. So it's like, what can you really get them to do? Or actually pay attention to, but something that was like, you know, varsity vocals has this expectation, right? That when you're in these spaces, you recognize that you're going to be interacting with people from everywhere and from all walks of life and from all experiences. And the one rule that we have is that you treat everybody like the nicest that you freaking can. And I know that that is the behavior of all of the staff of Varsity Vocals, right? But it would be wonderful if that was like explicitly called out. And to be fair, I've never been a competitor, so I don't know what the messages to the competitors look like in written form and stuff like that. But some sort of thing that just makes it clear, like, we don't tolerate this type of behavior. And if that behavior happens, there are consequences.
I wanted to echo and highlight something that you said earlier, Bryan, that I really liked and that I approached, or I tried to approach to kind of how I use my position of privilege in a lot of groups for me, it really has been so important. I mean, my whole life, I want people to call me out when I'm wrong. It's how I grow, but also like I can bear that risk. Like, I don't think there's anybody that I need or want in my life so bad that has like disconnected from me after I like said something in defense of somebody. You know, I can part of it is I feel like, as speaking as a not to derail a little bit, but like when I can bear the brunt and like take on a situation or speak for someone who would be at more risk, you know, if like a woman or person of color. I try to take that situation. Of course, it's always, I guess, precarious. I'm not trying to speak for people in most instances or all. So it's feeling that. But I really, really resonated with what you said about accepting that you're wrong sometimes. A lot of the time. I'm probably wrong a lot.
Absolutely. More people coming back. I just asked Coots and Green to send out an email to all the people that were registered to let them know we were back on. So we should have more people joining. Who next?
I just wanted to add one more thing. I know Dan has interviewed me for his work, but Bryan, thank you for pointing out, we have had some website edits, and I know we had a diversity and inclusion policy that was up, and I know CASA has one that has been published. I can't speak to any other institutions, but I would agree with that. I think that one recognition that so many of these institutions are ultimately run on volunteers, and recognizing that a volunteer who's not willing to take the time or the effort to give generosity to everyone is not a volunteer that is that has a place. I have received quite a bit of criticism in my role, both with Boss and also with Varsity Vocals as a judge and as a producer, for saying some things about some people that are incredibly talented individuals, but who have said things to me that are actively not inclusive, are not, their motivations seem to be not motivated, to not be centered on best practices for treating human beings as humans. And I think if you push back in a judge room and I hear about it, about if you misgender someone and you are corrected multiple times and you choose not to actively do that, I'm not interested in having that person on a panel. And I address it with some folks. If I hear that it's a perpetuated thing or that I am being then called out for my response to it, they're done. And I want to like say that authoritatively, that, you know, I'm not interested in cancel culture. I'm not interested in like banning. We have no blacklist, but I do have the best interests of everyone involved in our tournament: judges, competitors, audience members. And I think centering that and making it an inclusive space to create music, which is what we're all there to do, is necessary. So please, I will ultimately say, like, if you feel that there have been things in the two institutions that I work for, or any of the institutions that have been mentioned. I know that the AEA is interested in inclusivity. I know that, Bryan, what's the overarching organization for Sing Strong?
Sing Strong.
Oh, okay. I thought that there might be a.
Not anymore. I think it's just Sing Strong.
But I can speak and say, if you as an individual feel like there is a space that others are not, there are people who want to hear you. And I think everyone is on a journey to learn how to be inclusive and create space for people. I know I have been wrong and I've answered questions wrong, or I've responded incorrectly at some point that I may not even know of. And recognizing that because these are institutions built up of individuals, that can be, yeah. So if anyone, I mean, there's only 9 of us here. I don't know what I'm saying, but yeah, we're pretty dedicated to it. Every judge meeting, we have discussion about inclusivity, about using neutral pronouns, speaking about voice parts. And I think that's something that I did audits on this year for my judge room. So I messaged judges that I know and love and asked, was this a core component of the judge meeting you had? And to the individuals that didn't do it or forgot, because it is muscle memory, you have to do it in the judge meeting, they received a message from me and said, hi, please remember this, that kind of thing. So it's important. We do take it seriously.
Yeah, I have to say one of the greatest experiences I've ever had in the acapella community was when I came out as non-binary, and then Emily was like, can I tell everybody in Varsity Vocals so that you don't have to? And can we update your bio and stuff for you? And then I got a message from Amanda just like welcoming me and affirming me. And it was so powerful that I didn't have to do anything but be myself, and other people took the time to do the work to make that space inclusive for me. So like that means so much to people. So thank you.
We're all just gonna cry now. It's okay.
I know.
I'm that cliched white woman crying in a diversity and inclusion.
But you're not crying because we attacked you, so you're doing great.
Good cry.
Yes. Anybody else have questions, comments?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. And something that I wanted to touch on real quick is the kind of somewhat insidious, I think, nature sometimes of the way that things can be non-inclusive for groups, especially in my experience on college campuses. I go to a school that is fairly low cost, so a lot of students who attend are from not super high socioeconomic background, and we kind of try to reflect that in the way that the groups themselves operate, the way they look, the way that they do their music. But one thing that I knew was a problem kind of when I started, which was now 6 years ago, which is scary. But the groups had a kind of standard for auditions that was built on a very regional, very kind of well-funded choral program understanding of what makes a good audition and what makes a good, I guess what makes a good singer too, by extent. And so I remember in my first, my audition, it was just like a scale first before I did anything else. And the scale was like sing this scale on like these syllables that sound like this and are very, chorally lifted and do all these things. And, luckily I was well enough trained that I could do it to the standard the group had. But I remember in the years after, as we were watching more auditions, I was noticing more and more kids from the same school district, from the same region were getting accepted, and fewer kids from anywhere else, from any other background, to the point where the group didn't really look or even behave like what I imagined the campus itself was like in its majority. So, I mean, I don't know, we can talk more about it, but one of the things that we implemented was we changed the structure of the audition to make it so that the scale and all of these elements of the kind of dominating choral background structure that we'd been using, we took them out, and we made the first part of the audition the solo, so that the first thing you hear is just the person's voice, and you can right away, you know, determine, okay, they're good or they're up to standard or not, you know. Because one of the things that had been happening is we had been missing out on a lot of students who didn't have that background, because they would sing phenomenal solos and have phenomenal auditions, but because they couldn't, you know, sing this scale the right way, or because Lee just pointed this out, and yes, sight reading, because they couldn't sight read this scale in the correct, what is it, the correct syllable or the correct even number sometimes, or whatever, because they couldn't do any number of these like specific skills, they weren't right for the group. And that didn't, I think, sit well with more and more of the members as time went on. So we shifted it, and then lo and behold, the group became significantly more diverse, not just in race and gender and any other kind of background, but really in socioeconomic background too. And now the group actually feels like it's a Philadelphia University group and not just, you know, a suburbs of Philadelphia University group. So I don't know if you want to talk on these kinds of ideas of like what little changes we can make to make these things happen, because that was something that we hadn't even considered until it was pointed out really blatantly by somebody who said, you know, why are you all having these people sight read these like super, anyway.
So I'm going to put a pin in that, and we'll come right back to it. Ashley had a question previously, and we didn't get a chance to get to them. So Ashley, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Can I talk in this?
Yes, we've got you.
Oh, cool. Okay. Sorry. I like went on to the recording tips and tricks, but when I saw this came back up, I was like, I'm gonna do this one. But like I just have like some background about my group. I'm like a collegiate a cappella group. We're from the San Fernando Valley in California. So we're like a co-ed collegiate a cappella group where I believe we're generally like very diverse, I think, in our group. And we didn't compete this year, like in ICCA or anything. We do compete sometimes, but we just didn't do it this year. And I noticed that a lot of the discussion that happened before was about like telling stories, and it was a lot about like ICCA sets in specific that I noticed. But my question was, because I'm more music oriented and I kind of want to be MD one day, that I want to ask, like, are there any suggestions or opportunities, like, or things that we could do on campus, or like to address this topic, or something that we could do in and like support our community through a cappella music, or if there's any like suggestions on things we could do as a group for that kind of stuff?
I have dozens, but the first one that comes to mind is just look around what's going on in your broader university and thrust yourself and thrust your group into it. On campus every year, there's a TEDx talk that happens at MSU. Every year, just about, there's an a cappella group that does a set. My group performed back in 2017. A couple years back, one of Ladies First, which is another group on my campus, phenomenal group, one of my favorite a cappella groups out there. They performed at the Women's March in Lansing in 2018. I have wanted my entire college career, I didn't get to, but to perform at, with the BSA, the Black Student Alliance on our campus has a Black Power rally, where it's just in performances of Blackness in dance, in theater, in rap and spoken word, and in singing. And I've wanted to put a group together to perform there. Performing and being present in your community as much and as broadly as you feel would be appropriate and as you feel comfortable doing as your group, and just being a part of it is a huge way to start making outreach into those communities and telling those kinds of messages. And then also with your, as you're music oriented, with your arrangements and the songs that you are doing, picking those with the intent of telling the stories that you want to tell from the perspective of your group.
Thank you for that suggestion. I just wanted to say, our group does like weekly, or when we used to be on campus, we used to do like weekly like performances just like at noontime outside and stuff every single week. So it would just be like a consistent thing. So like just like that, we just kind of try to put ourselves out on campus. But I feel like we could be doing a lot more with like the resources that we have, and like even just the demographic of our group is just I feel like there are a lot of like stories we could tell and like things we could like reach out to. I just wanted to ask like how we could like go about that, or like even just like reaching out to other groups, because there's not a big a cappella presence in our campus really.
So a couple things that I'll say. I'll start with the stories that you can tell. That when you think about, I think you're already moving in such a great direction, because you're saying, let me look at the makeup of my group and think about the stories that are not being told, right? And so many people don't even find that step, that I just want to like really acknowledge that, because it's so important. I think the next part of that is spending the time with your group to have the conversation, to say, we have a bunch of perspectives in this group, or backgrounds and experiences that we don't tell in our music today. If you and ask everybody, say, if you were going to tell a story about like an aspect of your experience that we don't normally share in this group, what song would you use to do it? And ask everybody to answer that prompt, and bring a song in. It's a great way to ask people to take a little bit of time of reflect. And all of us have songs that we relate to because of our experiences, that we have wished would be performed, or that we wish we got the opportunity to do, but we never thought our group would do them. And that's really that opportunity to ask people. A cappella people have all of the opinions. So I'm sure that your group will have some of those opinions. And then I think when reaching out to other groups, first of all, you're in a space right now with people who have a bunch of connections to groups, who all of which will be happy to connect you with people that you want to talk to or engage with, and help facilitate those conversations. The CASA Facebook group itself remains a pretty excellent place to just connect with people, because there's so many people in there that you will get responses on your posts. Again, some of them might be from 75-year-old white men who have never had to think about anything in their lives. But like, it's also a lot of them will be from people who are looking for the same connection as you. Take that opportunity and just post like, my group is looking to make connections with other groups to do X, Y, and Z, around this concept, and groups will come in. They'll be very excited to do that, because they're all looking for that. It's I talk about this unrelated to this, but like in my other life, I am the executive director of my fraternity. It is a fraternity founded by gay men for all sort of queer identified people who have an experience somewhere relating to maleness, which is, we're still working on a new definition for ourselves. But we often talk a lot about what it's like to be in a gay bar. And we talk about what it's like to be in a gay bar from a dating perspective, in the sense that everybody is waiting for somebody to come up and ask them. And the person who has the most luck in a bar is not the person who is the most attractive or the most talented or the most, any of those things. It is the person who is the most confident. And even if that confidence is not true, if you just take the step to walk up and ask the question, people are just waiting for people to ask them. because they're afraid of doing something on their own. So you, again, like you're already so close. You've asked the question here, and now just ask those groups. You know, never be afraid. Never be afraid to shoot your shot, right? You know, and take the risk. You want to do something, perform for some event, like, you know, ask the event, and then they'll be like, oh, we're really excited to have you. And then your group, you haven't even told them. Well, too bad, guys. This is an amazing opportunity. We've got to do it. You know, so just like, you know, I think go for it. Kyle, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you so much.
Of course.
No, I love what you said.
So I want to go back to Sebi's point, and I think this is something we can talk about, but then anybody, I think we all can talk about it. And this is, again, like, what are the things, the little things that you can do to make a cappella more accessible? And so I think here's a really simple and great one. When you're advertising, don't use gendered language. Just as a really simple one. Another one is don't require people wear a certain type of clothing to your audition. I'm gonna not say them all, but I think we can all just continue to like share some. So whoever wants to.
I think your question, Sebi, really kind of recontextualized an experience I have, and it's something I've been thinking about more and more. I auditioned for a choir, a community choir in DC last summer. I didn't get in, and definitely not just for this reason, but I'm not good at sight singing. I didn't have voice lessons before college. We didn't do that in my voice lessons in college. I didn't get a music degree, and that was an essential part of it. And I know I can tell when I'm wrong, but I'm bad at sight singing, and that's just a small example of the type of stratification I think in singing, and I think it comes through in a lot of ways. I think, I mean, of course, there's beyond classism, there's an intersectionality to these problems, but even in, I think, just our interactions within the a cappella community, I think sometimes, because we get excited about people who are really talented, it can feel like there's some cool kids club, and like that there's some thing about being better when you are technically more talented or have that success, and it really hurts. It can feel really uncomfortable, and in maybe weird thing to say, I feel like I've been on both sides of that, and I don't like it. And I mean, I think it's not only like it's really important. I think this is something that pervades our whole conversation, us just being critical and like noticing like, oh wait, that one element of our audition process that has these problematic undertones, problematic for lack of a better word, but also just like, how do I talk to people, and when people talk to me a certain way, how do I react? You know what I mean? Like if somebody came up to me and was like, oh my God, Kyle, you're such a good bass, I'm like, hold up. But also accept, you know, it's hard, but I think being critically aware and carrying ourselves forward, I think is really important.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything both of them just said. That thought specifically, Sebi, you took me back to thinking about my auditions with State of Fits and both being on both sides when I got in my freshman year, and also running them for the next 3 cycles, and what I looked at in the audition for members and realizing things about that. And there are definitely some elements of classism that are present in that. For example, we don't judge on ability to read music. We've taken many people that have not been able to read music, and it has done them well and done their group well. But that is still an element of the audition, I'm realizing, and that is something that they do. And it's kind of one of those unsaid requirements. Like you have to be able to read music to be in a group, even though like I'm a passable singer, but I am excellent at reading music, and it does me no good because I just learn everything from part tracks anyway. But I'm realizing the little aspects of those processes that we can change. Like for example, State of Fits does those. We do auditions for the group with the solo first, like you all move to, and I think that has been invaluable in letting somebody's voice be the first thing that speaks for them. And I think that concept just spread throughout the rest of how we intake people into a cappella groups and how we view individuals as members of a singing group is letting their singing voice and their personality speak for them first beyond everything else. So just having those incredible realizations like you have about where else in these processes those things may exist, I think and consistently seeking those out can be invaluable.
Yeah, I think it was definitely really enlightening to realize how much of the a cappella culture at our school was kind of dictated by the music school in a secondhand way. You know, like a lot of the students in the a cappella community were students at the music school at Temple. And in a cappella, in my group, when I was a freshman, the vast majority of us were. And I think it also speaks volumes that now there are only 2 music majors in the group out of 12 after all these years have passed, because the structure has changed so much and the standards have changed so much that there's just so much more understanding of what people's values and skills can be that they can bring to a group beyond just like a technical understanding of Western notation, because there's so much more to music, you know, beyond all of that.
And I think that's, for me, I think anytime you talk about diversity and inclusion, some people who don't have experience with it instantly read that as, oh, we're just going to kind of lower our standards, and my one idea of excellent is going to be not as strong, so it's not going to be as good. And I think looking at what your group did, Sebi, like you brought in what you're looking for, and you looked at like what is the essential things that we need, and it's not just this one specific skill that people are given, but you're able to kind of broaden what you were looking for, and you're able to like be able to bring in different perspectives. I think that really helped your group in the long run. And I feel like you see that a lot, like with kind of how people are looking at like the production and the arranging, and a lot of it's just like, oh, but if you're not going with these people, then you're not going with the best, you're not going to be as good. And I think we need to start looking at like, hey, if we want to have a more reflective, a more diverse thing at the top, we need to look at like, who are we supporting, and like, can we bring more people up to that? Because it's not going to be lowering standards, it's not going to be that. It's just going to be broadening our net, and then with more people that have those skills, then it's going to be even stronger.
I'd also like to say that in that area, you can openly speak about these communities. Like if you're interested in sharing how, like in my group, we would openly try to let people know, I could not argue us out of a sight singing section, but we would say, our high soprano, you know, the one who everybody's voice, they're like, wow, that high soprano, we would say out loud, she doesn't read music. And she's like, I don't. And that was sort of the entrance level of things for us. It was like, oh, okay, so yes, you can sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star at your audition. You don't have to know a song. You don't have to even know what 16 bars is. And this very present forward singer who has a solo and is like the high soprano, she's in our group and we love her, and she doesn't know how to read music. And even as she gradually learned to read music in college, she just kept volunteering that information to every auditionee. And I think it's the same thing as, it's a level of like an invitation with a lack of an assumption that I think can go across the board, not just at the audition level, but also in the groups, people you invite to come to see your group perform, and the people that you choose to spend your time, and how, you know, the skill sets we recognize and value can change. I think it was really interesting. I told someone once, they were talking about how they didn't read music, but they wanted to start arranging. And I said, well, you know, there are a lot of incredible arrangers who don't write down their arrangements, they sing them. And the fact that there are people out there who don't know that, like Shams Ahmed does part tracks. He can notate his arranging, but he sings and then sends it as a part track. That opens up a whole new world of people to be able to be part of that. Yeah, sorry, I'm going back on mute.
One of our best new arrangers had never read music before coming into the group and sat down and took a loop station that I have and just did this stupidly good arrangement and then presented it to the group, and we were all like, and I think just goes to show, I mean, yeah, I think you're 100% right. Like it's, you don't know what you're missing by just kind of putting a certain standard on something that is based in an ultimately kind of arbitrary skill. Because if you're a musician, that means you're a musician one way or another, and you can bring any kind of skills to a group. And I think the definition of musician is not somebody who can read music.
I think we can also all do better at elevating voices that are new. One thing I struggle with, and I don't know if some of you would on the panel or everyone would like to talk about this, but earlier, Bryan, you suggested that people post in the Casa area. I have been in this community for a really long time, and I am scared to ask questions in public forums like that because so many people are negative and overwhelming. The community is tired because we have this cycle of people, but it is very difficult. There are smaller groups like these, where things are very encouraging and we put art out there and things like that, but it feels like sometimes there are voices that get elevated. And so I think like as a collective, every institution, I include everyone I work for, everyone I've partaken and beyond, can do better at encouraging people to learn however that may be. We all want to be that, but sometimes we're just like, I can't watch another video or I can't do this. And it's like, I see Isaiah laughing, but.
Yeah, I know Ashley, your hand is raised, so why don't you go, and then after that, Dan will come to you.
Hi, I actually have a question related to what we were just talking right now for my group. It's very diverse with our majors. We have a lot of different majors. As I said, we're a collegiate a cappella group. A handful are music majors. So we do run into that problem of sight reading, and for us, we include it in our audition, but it doesn't hurt your chances of getting into the group. It's just to gauge your level of sight reading. But what I've noticed in our group is that often when it comes to the discussion of sight reading, some people are not as proficient at it as other people are. And of the times that we've had discussions on it, it's turned a little bit defensive, or people get very defensive, on either side of issues of you should be improving your sight reading, but also you should account for us not being as proficient. And I know that's I feel very neutral on the subject, and I understand that it's a subject to be discussed, but I'm wondering if anyone has any suggestions on how to facilitate the discussion without either side of the spectrum being feeling alienated, or that, I don't know, some you know what I'm saying? Yeah, just how to facilitate and moderate that discussion in my group.
I have some thoughts on this. I think what's really important for people on both sides to recognize when we're discussing something like, oh, what are the things we want to include in audition? What are the important skills? Get down to the essential thing, what does strong sight reading allow? What does it indicate? And maybe there's a mode in which somebody else who maybe that strength comes from their sight reading ability, maybe it comes from something else for some, people are accomplishing the same thing differently. So for example, from my perspective, what would I value in a strong auditionee? I would say intonation is really important. Blend, stuff like that. Are people prepared and reliable? You know what I mean? I learn my parts via part tape or by ear, or I write or improvise them. And I don't really sight read. But like for me, knowing myself, I would know going in to an audition that like, okay, this is not what I do. How do I prepare myself? How do I show that? So from the audition host perspective, I think again, it's like this critical perspective of like seeing where that value comes through. And I think maybe in the group internal conversation, again, breaking it down to these building blocks and recognizing where people's strengths lie, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would say that, oh, hi everyone. How's it going? Good morning. I just woke up from a nap. So ultimately, sight reading, music, sheet music is a tool for learning. It's a way to learn your music. It is a very fast way. It is something that is very easy. It's a language that everyone can speak collectively. So if you have everybody speaking the same language in your rehearsal, that's great. But also at the same time, it is not necessary because people learn other ways as well. People can learn by part track, like Kyle was saying. People can learn by recording their part in rehearsal. You sing it to them, they record it, and then they learn it later. In VoiceBox, we have a lot of people who don't, like we had a lot of people come in who didn't know how to read music at all. And it's always a good thing to encourage people to learn because it's just another skill that they can have. It's just another thing that'll help them as a musician later in life. I again think of it like a language, but ultimately just like having the conversation of like, well, if there are people who can learn different ways and that's how they learn, then we can adjust to that, and finding an efficient, easy way for them to learn. If they don't know sheet music, like for example with some of the girls that like didn't know sheet music in VoiceBox, they would literally get into rehearsal, have their phone out and be like, can you sing that? Got it. And they would record it. So yeah, it shouldn't be an elitist thing. It shouldn't be something that, oh, if you don't know it, then you are a bad musician. Like it really should just be a tool that you can use to learn music faster.
Yeah, and I think one thing that you touched on, Ashley, that I want to make sure that we talk about is people getting defensive sort of about their ability or lack of ability. So people get defensive because they have had a ton of experience being told that it makes them less of an artist or less good, right? This is we see another great example of this from like other areas. We can think about students coming into a space and like to talk about an English class and they just don't spell well, right? And they get defensive about the fact that they can't spell well because they've been told that it's a measure of their value. And so some of the things that I think you can do to combat that defensiveness is to allow them to feel defensive and explain to them, that, affirm to them that you understand why they feel defensive and that, that those feelings are valid, but that this is a space they don't have to feel that way. This is a space that doesn't use that value measurement, right? That doesn't say that people who can sight read are better than people who can't. And that in your group, you are setting different rules for how we value people. That I think is one of the most powerful things that you can do in your group is look at the world and say, what are the implicit rules that the world operates in that we don't want to operate inside of, that we want to be better than, and then be explicit about those. I think that is an opportunity because I think the act of feeling defensive is real and important, and we don't want to tell people don't be defensive. We want people to be able to express those emotions, but we also want them to understand they don't have to feel that way here. But for them to get there, they have to know that it's okay when they have an emotion to express it. And so often we are taught that the only way to have conversations about things is very analytically and calmly, without yelling or anything like that. And I don't know how to have conversations like that. Um, and so, I mean, I grew up in a household where my mother, to this day still, whenever my dad and I start talking even mildly passionately about things, she's like, stop yelling, stop arguing, and we're just talking. And so, you know, we've had to explain to her multiple times, we're not arguing and like we're just talking with each other. But also we had to, like, recently I understood that like her experience growing up meant that she was reacting to like a learned expression of what loud, angry talking meant. And that we need to be considered about what that meant for her. So sometimes we have to sort of work through people's experiences and understand where they come from to help them move past sort of the things that are getting in their own way about being able to discuss things.
Yeah, if I could throw one last thing in here, on the idea, it's really about the idea of what people perceive to make them lesser as in a musical context, and really how we can fight back against that. At Michigan State, there are 7 a cappella groups, and across them, I was one of, out of all of the groups, out of everybody that sang a cappella at MSU, I was one of maybe 3 music majors. I was the only one in my group. I think I was the only, or one of like 2 to ever be in my group in our 10-year history. So and I went out of my way to communicate both to the rest of the groups, the rest of the a cappella community, and to kids whenever they would ask questions about that when we went on tour, that me being a music major doesn't make me a better musician inherently than anybody else in this group. As a matter of fact, me being an a cappella music director has done far more for me as me getting my music education degree than the music ed degree will ever have done for me being in State of Fits. Like, so I think there's an idea there about, and that's a element of classism as well, of people thinking or ascribing certain elements of importance and expertise and value to just having the degree. So I think that's something to confront in those conversations as well. But just largely making sure that, yeah, everyone's valid. All musical experience is valid no matter where it comes from, whether it's good at sight reading. Like ICCA isn't like high school choir festival. There's no sight reading component. Like as long as you're able to perform the music on stage and put it forth and tell your story in a very intentional and powerful and accurate way, that's what matters. It doesn't matter how you get to that point. And same thing at the performance. When you put on if you go to a good concert, you don't look at the guitarist and, you know, man, I know he can read some tabs really well. Like you just look at how that performance made you feel and how it sounded. So it's important to communicate that how we get there doesn't really matter as much as what the performance is. And as Christine mentioned, which I absolutely loved, the idea that everything that we use up to get to that point is a skill. It's something we can put in our toolbox and use. Is not the end all be all of what we put on the stage.
Anybody else? Any thoughts, comments? I mean, we've gone for 2 hours now, which is wonderful.
What other topics did you guys discuss?
Goodness. What did we discuss? We talked about like the role of institutions in like a cappella institutions in furthering diversity, equity, and inclusion. We talked about how like what groups can do when they're pretty homogenous, but they want to invite more diversity, equity, and inclusion in. We talked about how to increase, like how to help a group find its identity, especially in collegiate groups when identity constantly changes, because the members change. We talked about what to do when you're in a situation where you have a group of students or people who are, you lock into a group where you have a group of people who are from a marginalized identity, and you're looking about what it looks like as a teacher to take them into a competition space, and yet you're kind of worried about what they're going to experience when that happens and how people are going to see them. So we talked about, I think those are some of the things that we talked about. We talked about some definitions around stuff, which went out.
Kitty. Yes.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I'm missing other topics we talked about.
Did we talk about gender?
Oh, we talked about gender a little bit. I made people cry a little bit. But I talked about my experience of coming out as non-binary and the wonderful way Varsity Vocals handled that.
MB Gang, yes.
Yes. And just like what that feels like to have an institution do the work for you to make sure that, like, I didn't have to tell anybody in Varsity Vocals. Emily did it all for me. And that was huge, including updating my bio, which I would have never done. But not much more than that. We didn't get a ton into like what it looks like to deal with gender inside of a group too much.
Mm-hmm. There was a question asked about, it was in the last chat and it got deleted when we got unceremoniously shut off, but it asked about what the response would be to, or what we think about the use of gender terms in groups, like all male a cappella group, all female a cappella group, so on and so forth, and what our thoughts would be. I have thoughts, but I know both of you have more experience with that, so I will let you all go first.
Go, Christine. Talk about it.
Oh, man. Okay, so, little old me, I, look feminine. People say woman, people say she all the time. I am non-binary, and I'm honestly, genuinely on the middle to masculine side, but I still go by she because it's, like, fine, I guess. And sometimes I get invited to, like, talk with, like, women a cappella stuff, like, oh, we want you on our podcast about women in a cappella, and I'm like, do I qualify? And like that's the experience that I have all the time. And like when I was in high school, when I was in college, I'm 23 now. When I was in college, I would always think, because I was in a co-ed group, I was in a group that had the whole spectrum, so we could say all gender, and that was fine. I was like, okay, I fit in. But if it was like all female, I'd be like, I guess my voice fits, but like I don't fit, do I? And then also you have the thing of like, I remember this was not even that long ago. This was not like 2016 when Lark won So Jam, and Andrea was their lady bass, and people were like, is that fair? And I was like, yes, it's all female, so she's a girl, so yes, and it was a debate. It was like not even that long ago, and people were upset about it, and I was like, you guys suck. But that's kind of like the issue is like, do we qualify by gender? If so, do we like, obviously what you identify with is what you are, like if you say you're a woman, no matter what parts you have, no matter what your voice sounds like, no matter what you look like. So do we qualify by that, or do we qualify by voices, so we can include some like non-binary people? Or my suggestion, we just make some non-binary a cappella groups that rock.
I'm here, Christine. Let's start them.
Yes.
I do think that you make a really good point. So I think that I just can imagine now the MBICA. There's
yes.
like thousands of non-binary groups.
Yes, and we all are the best.
Right. But I do think what I'm starting to see is some, I think we definitely are seeing, the voice part thing, which I think is where you start to include more people. And we get away from that opportunity to classify people by gender and gender identity even. It is, you know, but it's also interesting because I think the flip side of that, which is, and this is some of the things that I've heard from some groups, or some people in groups, and I mean, Elliot was on here earlier from Ithaca Pella, and Elliot absolutely wanted to be in Ithaca Pella because Elliot identifies as a man, right? And so being in a space that was an all male identified space with that language was very affirming for him as a trans man. You know, and I hear about that a lot in my fraternity too, right? Like, and so how do we make sure that we create the space that allows people to feel identified when the structures, when the structural language can be oppressive and affirming at the same time, without sending the incorrect signals to the wider world, or I'm gonna say that, not necessarily sending the incorrect ones, but having other people interpret it incorrectly, and then use that in a way that ends up ultimately intentionally or unintentionally, like causing harm to the members in the group. And I think that's an open question. I think we're figuring it out. You know, I think it's great that our largest a cappella competitions don't care about the makeup of your group. Also, we at I think at Sing Strong it was this year maybe, or the last year, because we have a big high school competition, right? And so we used to do the high school competition. We used to give more awards. You do a best male soloist and a best female soloist, and we just started doing best soloist awards and doing multiple ones, you know, to make sure that people had that opportunity. To be, you know, to take that language out. And, you know, Jonathan is really, has been really good at giving that instruction to all of the judges and talking to them about how to work that. I'm the MC, so I don't ever mess up. Not true. But yeah, so I do think there's still that exploration and opportunity, and still so many groups see themselves that way. And making that change, I think, is confronting expectations about identity.
One thing that I think is kind of fun that I really want to encourage more groups to do as well, understanding more about gender, understanding more about identity, is I've seen groups themselves kind of redefining and exploring what their gender identity is. I've seen a group identify themselves as femme. And like, I thought that was just like a really cool way of looking at, hey, we're not an all female group. We're not female identifying. We're just saying we're femme. And if you want to be a part of a femme group, be a part of our group. And I think it's really exciting to see groups being like, hey, we don't have to brand ourselves as being this or this. There's so many other ways that we can do it, and we can have our identity, and it's really exciting.
I mean, who's ready to make the first cryptid group?
Me.
Yeah.
I'm in. My gender is redacted.
Yes.
No, I love that actually. Like, we're a mascot cappella group. I'm like, yes. I love that.
Oh my God. That would be the best.
Actually. I think that it circles around to, like, I love the idea that people are, it is affirming to people to have like a validating like label, like, oh, I'm like, you know, like you said, like a trans man in a male identifying group. That's sick that he feels great in that space. But then the other takeaway is like, we have to encourage people who do that and label themselves as that to say, you can't exclude trans people.
Right, yeah.
And it doesn't matter if their voice, if they're a SOP1, they're still a man, and you have to accept that. Or like if you have an all-female group and you have a girl who can sing way down there, doesn't matter. She's still a girl, so.
Oh, and also the whole thing where it's okay, like, it is infinitely more acceptable right now to have a group branded as all female and have somebody with a super low voice than it is to have a, you know, a group branded as all male and have somebody who's a SOP1, right? And especially if they're trans, right? Which is a whole commentary on sexism anyway. but also just thinking about where that comes from. I mean, where a lot of this comes from when we think, I just think about the bigger picture of the whole male-dominated bias that still exists in a cappella overall. I have a very good friend who's like incredibly conscious of gender and works in higher ed and is queer. And it's like, you know, I just really like the all-male sound in a cappella. And I was like, I love you, but what is wrong with you? Like,
No
he doesn't
offense,
know
though.
anything about music, right? He doesn't. So it, like, and I get what that really means is that's the thing I first heard, right? And I connected with it, and I don't know how to expand from it. And
that was, oh, sorry, I
go for it.
I thought you were done.
Bryan.
That was something I wanted to, I'm sorry. That was something I wanted to ask about. It was something nomadic. We were kind of trying to navigate when we announced auditions. We were like, well, we don't really care what's in their pants, but we have a goal for our sound. And that's something that I'm not sure how I feel about. Like, I think like the traditional TTBB sound, cool. Do I care who makes that sound? No. But at the same time, and maybe it's like a pseudoscience thing where we all have this intuition that, like, you know, people who are X, Y, and Z are the ones who, when they sing in the between, I'm just gonna say random letter, like A5 and A2, like when they sound like they're gonna sound X, Y, and Z way, and their passagios are this way. I think that's part of the challenge with this, is because I think we've all kind of, not all, but I think a lot of people are very comfortable moving on from this idea that, like, oh, an all male identifying group needs to be everybody with penises, and yada yada, but trying to move away from the sound traditions, or the idea or perception of a tradition of like TTBB, and like as non-experts navigating that too. I think maybe that's where a lot of the friction is. I mean, open question. And I don't know.
I think part of it, like you mentioned, like these like ranges and the passaggio and things, and as soon, because like Ashley talked about earlier, people can get really defensive about that. Part of what these things are like the historical consolidations of Western ideas of what the voice can be, still being the end-all be-all default language that we use. For example, that like we have to use a passaggio. Why couldn't we use any other word from any other language or tradition? So like, which is not to call you out at all, but to say like, this is the language that, again, going back to what Sebi said earlier about like, what are the technical things, or as Lee said, and I loved it, breaking down the barriers to entry. Like, it doesn't, like, there are moments, or like the vocabulary that we use, or the constructs that we have for the voice and for singing. Those are the things that, like, expanding our ideas of what that can be allows it to be like Bryan said, like knowing how to expand past the first thing that we heard.
That's an excellent point. I was talking with an educator friend the other day, a music educator, and they were saying, yeah, I haven't taken my choirs to a choral festival in years, because when I went there, we tried to do something that was tonally different, and you know, they expect all the girls to be singing in their head voice, and everything else is unacceptable. I think, and like I use the word, I take no offense at all, you saying what you said. I use the word passaggio because it's like, yeah, these are our building blocks are limited. They're like boxes. So maybe rather than being like, well, tradition has told me TTBB exists and that's a sound I want, just imagining like you could just receive an audition and think like, okay, how does this fit into our sound? Is this what we're looking for? Without a preconceived notion.
I don't know why people think like higher voices don't sound good. I think it's because we just aren't paying attention to the good groups. And I think the best way to show people wrong is by providing examples and to like blast their stuff on social media and be like, hey, this group rocks and you should listen to them. And they have, sorry, my cat is biting me. Yeah, I think like every time someone's like, oh, I just think that male voices just sound better. I'm like, it's because you don't know. You just don't know. You just haven't seen it. You just have this notion in your head. So I encourage, if we're talking about this and y'all have some bomb all-female groups or higher voices like alto soprano groups, you're like, this rocks. I encourage you to send it to people and like put it on your stories and blast it.
I want to add that like a common thing that I always hear about like treble voiced groups is that, oh, it's so angelic. Like that's the one thing that I hear about, like especially like treble voices. But then like when I hear like lower voice, like voice parts, it's like, wow, there's so much power. Or like, I don't know, I feel like that's the thing that I've noticed like in every like description that I've heard of different voicings, and it's like I just like realized that like right now. Like that's so crazy.
I find it's really something I started doing at ICCA this year was when I write little like encouraging things on Twitter about my groups while they're on stage or during their sound checks. And one of the things that I started checking in on is if people were okay with my interpretation of things specifically in that vein, because one of the things we've seen in the Great Lakes and also in the Northeast, Isaiah, you can, and actually many people on this call can probably vouch for this as well, is that the alternative is that in order to be a group, we have to model ourselves and be strong and be badass, and that is also, it's a false dichotomy. One can be all of these things in any gender, in any space, and so I think like I try to take it from the musical point of view, but I think you're totally right. There are this like false dichotomy. You either have to be a badass or you have to be an angel. It's the angel or whore dichotomy, and it just doesn't work in music or in real life.
Yeah, I will blast from the rooftops, and I always do. There are a number of treble groups that I either know or have been privileged enough to work with that like go against this, like these stereotypes of treble groups so effortlessly well. Like one of my favorite a cappella groups of all time always will be Lark, because they are above all amazing. And then I just love the idea of somebody with these preconceived notions going to a performance, seeing these people in flowery dresses, and then having their brains blown by the sound, the incredible sound that comes out of their mouths. That just always just subverts those expectations. So I always share and love sharing those kinds of things. Another is the group I'm currently student teaching at a high school, and the group that I work with is they identify as all female, but they're a treble group that does both edges of the dichotomy and everything in between, and they are incredible and versatile, and they get that comment at ICHSA all the time that they go above and beyond in showcasing the versatility of their sound and breaking those stereotypes. So there are the groups out there that consciously go against what these very gendered expectations of them are. And I seek them out and I blast them on all sound waves. Ladies First at MSU too. Oh my Lord, I love them year in and year out, and they are incredible. So yes,
Melodic.
for sure.
The Harmolodics.
Harmolodics, yes.
Yeah, so the Harmolodics from Northern Illinois University specifically eschew this idea. They joke that they are an all-female identifying fraternity, and they call themselves a brotherhood, which I think is really quite wonderful. I know a lot of groups who have names that have put them in spaces. Like ladies first have discussed the fact that their name maybe doesn't suit every member of their group at all times, and that's a continuing discussion that they have in the way that they present themselves in their introductions on stage and the music that they choose. I think Pitch Please from Northeastern, I haven't seen them this year, but I will say, like, the evolving of we have to be bad asses all the time to we can show vulnerable sides to we don't have to do anything, we don't have to subvert, we don't have to recreate this whole consciousness. I mean, that's the thing I really struggle with, is the idea that you have to do anything, you have to surprise people, or you don't, you have to be anything. It's unhealthy. And it makes me worry like that's this narrative that you have to do XYZ. It should be music.
I'm just enjoying listening to you all talk.
This is so nice. I wish we could do this all the time.
We can.
I miss friends.
I have video
I'm
chat.
lonely.
I know.
I'm in my house.
I just have my cat. That's it.
I was feeling sentimental, almost like misty-eyed, just like listening to people talk. I feel like one of the challenges with like the emotional dichotomies that gendered groups face, I think, has been unfortunately kind of reinforced by paradigms we have in what formulas for what people perceive to be successful competition sets. We like oftentimes, you know, it's like fun or strong opener, then like we need a sensitive middle song, and then power again. And it's like, wow, we just had like two things there: power, sensitive, power. And like, I think we talked about this in the first call, touching on more substantive things, or maybe just touching on issues that kind of involve more nuanced emotions, that and evocative lyrics, or maybe leaving our paradigms of what kind of tone we're singing in. That those things are maybe ways we can break away from that. But it really, that's why I think there's some of the most memorable sets are ones that left the paradigm. At the same time, I think it's also okay to sometimes just, if you want to just do a song like that, like it's okay to have that middle song be low key if that's what you really connect with, you know what I mean? But we don't have to. And I think viewing it's like, if we view, like, for example, certain competitions as institutions, we need to change the way we view our institutions to change the institutions, and like act on that to actually change the institutions too.
Yeah, one of the earlier topics was, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was just going to say, I love what you just said about like needing to change the view of the institutions and of the paradigms. I was really lucky early in my judging career to judge with Bryan, and they challenged me. I remember we were fighting over a best soloist. I don't know if you remember this, Bryan. We were fighting over a best soloist, that there was someone that I thought was technically more proficient, and someone that Bryan said they told a much better emotional story, particularly around queerness. It was a duet, actually.
Yeah.
And at the time I was like, well, I don't know, maybe. And we gave it to the duet, and now I'm completely like, I don't look at arrangement hardly anymore as a judge. I almost always will just look at dynamics, emotions, and whether or not like tone blend, like
Emily's like, oh no.
He's talking about the subjective rank. It's okay.
Like I look for those things, but they're not the things that like we all as judges care about particular things. And I'm like, there's always going to be 1,000 arrangers who are looking at technical things. I don't need to do that.
No, but the technical arrangements aren't the ones that are going to be the reason that's why the subjectives exist.
Yes.
they exist for covering creativity, covering emotional connectivity. They cover those sorts of things. The whole premise we're discussing this on, I will say though, I sort of, and this is from someone who runs two very separate competitions, seems to be almost a false premise that value is somehow determined by what is awarded on a stage at ICCA or BOSS or any of those kinds of things. We have a very specific rubric. We are scaling on a very specific rubric. And so while groups that are like the Enharmonic set from last year, which I found to be very diverse, very interesting, very technically difficult, and also very compelling to watch people share. Same with so-called vocal sets, nor'easter sets, blah, blah, blah. People are always sort of trying to tie into those. Those are not groups that I have any issue saying they compel us musically, but they also are hitting every spot on the rubric to get to that place. And there's been so much focus on storytelling and on feelings. We have a festival for storytelling, creativity, and feelings. It is BOSS. I created a weird place to put those stories on stage. And yes, there is an audition process to get groups into BOSS, and you do have to sing well to do so, because it's impossible to tell a compelling story if you're not tuning for the most part. Can I get a nod? I just need Lee to like agree with me on this, because I like am looking directly at you and I just he's like, no, first place, heart of heart. But I think that this idea that somehow there has to be a stage or a reward at the end of messaging, to me, is false. Because sharing a story, even if it's not perfectly tuned, even if the dynamics aren't there, although the dynamics very much help in the storytelling, I'm not saying that there's not a place for that at ICCA, but you are entering in a tacit agreement that your storytelling, that your narrative is judged on this rubric. And so I'm sorry, like, you know, we've had issues where we get emails from parents saying, you know, our kids told this beautiful story about school violence. And my response is, it was incredible. And they got to share that to hundreds of people in the audience. That's the prize.
What's so fun about music is that there are several facets of it. You know, part of it is emotional, part of it is something that you can connect to on a more like nebulous emotional level. It's art, but on the other hand, it is math. And there's a way to tune things, and there is a way to like that. There's a math to a logic to music. And I'm also personally very competitive, so I want to win all the time. So if they want me to do this, this, and this, I'm going to do it because I want to win. That's my goal. But also at the same time, while I'm doing that and doing all the numbers and doing all the math, I can also have a great story. So I think there is value to both aspects, and they are not separate from each other. And I don't think that you have to sacrifice your math music side, the perfect tuning and the good arrangements and XYZ for the emotional and for the storytelling. I think you can have both of them. And it frustrates me when I see people who are on either side, where they're like, we want to just tell a story, we don't care about how it sounds. I'm like, well, you can make it sound really, 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 really good and have a good time and have a great story at the same time. Or people who are like, we just have to have it perfect, doesn't matter what we're singing about. And I'm like, what are you doing this for? You know what I'm saying?
There was a group, getting back to our original discussion with Bryan, where Bryan mentioned that telling stories that are authentic to you as a collective is one of the most important things. There's a rule in like writing workshops that you don't tell someone else's story without their permission, and you never tell the story of someone else's trauma through your own lens. And I think that's like a nice little circle to get back to, because there are so many times that I will give you an example. There was a specific group at a very privileged institution that did not do a very good job at an ICCA tournament because they did a set about heroin usage on stage and it didn't land. And they were very confused and sent many emails to me and the former judge coordinator about this set, being like, they didn't get it. And I had to call all the judges and then respond, they got it, they just didn't like it. And also, like, that feels very disingenuous for you to ask a group of 16 people from a privileged institution to tell the story of someone else's struggle. Maybe it's one person in your group struggle, but that was not how it was portrayed. And I think like, if we're getting back into diversity and inclusion, like that is very key to me in storytelling. And when I'm responding to something, I struggle backstage with groups who are telling other people's trauma through their own lens when it's not theirs.
Yes.
There are very few times when I, as a producer, am not generous of spirit, but I really struggle to compliment or to connect in any manner when people take others' stories and they're like, well, we just want to put it out there. I'm like, this isn't for you. And I'm pretty generous in the way that I'm like, okay, I could see how this would go down that line. But there have been a couple of times where I'm just like, and they'll if they give me the opportunity to give them advice, I'm like, say something that's yours. Share that authenticity that Bryan spoke about.
Yeah, I think I had a very interesting conversation with somebody about a group that did a song about white allyship. And it's like they were trying really hard, but it was also like a school where these students had probably never actually had to be put in a place where they had to be a white ally, because they were in such a white place that they didn't even really interact with many Black people in general. So like the whole thing felt very disingenuous, them trying to sing, even just singing about allyship, because they'd never really been in a place where they had to be an ally.
Very true. Yeah.
And it's rough. Some people have the spirit and they have, you know, their hearts are in the right spot, but you're like, I've seen it a lot. I've seen that a lot.
I love this conversation, and thank you for having me. I need to head out, but I hope maybe we could have Zooms like this every once in a while and continue the conversation, I mean, beyond me leaving, but also in the Facebook group, if you can. And I hope you all stay safe and healthy.
Bye, Kyle.
Okay, bye.
See you later, Kyle.
I'm also heading out, but thank you all for this. This is fantastic. And I also hope to have future Zoom calls about diversity, equity, inclusion with wonderful a cappella people like yourself.
You're all going in his book.
I would love that.
I will be contacting a lot of you to set up Zoom interviews now, because
I'm down. Yeah. I have a lot of things to say, so.
I love it.
Yes, good. Sorry, I'm starving and attempting to order delivery.
Oh, when I went off video, I was eating a sandwich.
Yeah.
I also have to leave. My sister is getting married on Zoom in an hour, so I have to watch that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
her wedding congratulations.
Yeah, her wedding's supposed to be today. But you know how things work. So she has a cake that just says wedding, and that's it. It's amazing.
That's brilliant.
I'm gonna leave. Bye, guys.
All right, take care.
Bye, Christine.
Bye.
I guess we'll wrap up since everybody's heading out and give people the rest of their day back. I am probably supposed to. I'm supposed to be on another meeting in 2 minutes. I'm really good at this. Friends, this has been wonderful. Please continue this in the group chat. The Facebook group. We should definitely consider having these Zooms regularly, and we'll use that group to coordinate them.
There was a big question from a person in Hyannis Sound that came up in the Facebook. I don't know if you saw it.
Oh, I saw. Yeah, I'm in the process of responding.
Cool. I have a lot to say about their latest album. Probably in relation to this. Because the good songs were the ones where they were doing what they should have been doing, and the songs that were not as good were the ones where they decided to try to be Whitney Houston. And I'll just leave it there. And I have several friends in Hyannis Sound, and it broke me to see. I was like, but really, how will I know with a calypso beat fronted by a white dude? I'm just saying. And with that, apparently that's going to be the end of what's in this recording.
It's just Bryan being like, calypso beat what? No, I mean, Yeah, everyone's on a different journey.
As Lee said, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Like, talent affords you access to many things that you should still not do. All right, friends, take care, be well, love you all. Thank you.
Loved this. Thank
Thank
you all for
you.
So
coming
nice
in.
to see everyone's faces.
Bye.